Imagine managing a football club and finding out you've been sacked live on television. That actually happened. One manager discovered he had lost his job through a text message while he was still managing a match. Another was pulled aside and fired at his 5-year-old kid's birthday party. And one manager? A club director called into a radio show and sacked him live on air. But somehow, none of those are the strangest story in this video. Football management is supposed to be about tactics, trophies, and pressure. But sometimes, it becomes something far stranger. These are the weirdest manager sackings in football history. Let's start with the most recent one. Filipe Luis, Flamengo. Former Chelsea and Atletico Madrid left back. Took over Flamengo mid-season in 2024 when things were falling apart. He won the Copa Libertadores, won the Brasileiro, won the Campeonato Carioca, and the Brazil Supercopa. 64 victories in 101 games, only 15 defeats. Then on March 3rd, 2026, hours after his team beat Mora 8-0, 11-0 on aggregate, into the cup final, Flamengo called him into the dressing room. A 30-second conversation, and he was gone. His parting words? "I leave at peace, with my head up high and a clear conscience." Football is made of cycles, and ours was historical. What a cycle it was. For trophies in a year, sacked after winning 8-0. Football doesn't care about what you did yesterday. Martin Jol, Tottenham 2007. A UEFA Cup match. White Hart Lane, 45,000 fans inside. The game is being played, and Martin Jol on the touchline, still managing, gets a text message from a friend. The friend has read online that Joel has been sacked, while the match is still happening. The fans found out too. Word spread around the ground. And then White Hart Lane, with the game still going on, started chanting his name. Stand up for Martin Jol. He could hear it. He knew what it meant. He was already gone. Spurs lost 2-1. The official statement came after the final whistle. In any other industry, winning is enough to keep your job. In football, winning is just the beginning of the problem. Frank Clark, Manchester City, 1998. Frank Clark was at home. Turned on the local radio, heard that the Manchester City manager had been sacked, realized it was him. He was listening to fans calling about his own sacking before the club had officially told him. He sat there and listened. Imagine hearing about your sacking on radio. Too bad. Derek Dooley, Sheffield Wednesday. This one is genuinely cruel. Christmas Eve, Dooley turned up at Hillsborough, believing he was going to have a budget meeting. A normal, routine conversation about transfers. He walked into the Blue Room. The new board sacked him on Christmas Eve. In the Blue Room, when he thought he was there to talk about buying a midfielder, Dooley was so furious and hurt that he refused to step inside Hillsborough for nearly 20 years afterward. Christmas Eve, let that settle. Tony Adams, Portsmouth 2009. The Portsmouth chairman Peter Story had a decision to make. His manager, Tony Adams, needed to be sacked. This happens. It's part of football. The question is, when do you tell him? Story chose to deliver the news at his son Atticus's 5th birthday party. Adams was at the party. Story pulled him aside, gave him the news. Adams later told BBC Radio, "I haven't had a lot of time, and I certainly haven't had the financial backing." He said this calmly, professionally. He had just been sacked at a 5-year-old's birthday party. Sabin Yildirim Sakaryaspor, 2011. This one is extraordinary. Yildirim was the manager of Turkish club Sakaryaspor. He agreed to appear on a football phone-in show on the Turkish TV. Normal enough. Fans call in. Manager answers questions. Everyone goes home, except one of the callers was a board member named Cihan Yildirim. And Cihan Yildirim didn't call in to ask a question. He called in to sack his manager. Live on air, he announced on the radio, in front of thousands of listeners, Sabin humiliated the club, so he's removed from his position immediately. The host tried to intervene. Yildirim tried to respond. The board member was unmoved. Sacked. On a radio phone-in. By a caller. Right now we are about to get to the part where you will left and all. Make sure you stay to the end so you could see the weirdest. Jor Berger, Arminia Bielefeld 2009. Berger was signed as manager specifically to keep Bielefeld up in the Bundesliga. He managed one game. They drew 2-2 against Hanover. Relegated. He was sacked 5 days after being appointed. He got the job for one purpose. Did the one game that mattered. Failed. Gone. 5 days. Almost a record, but not quite. Malcolm Crosby, Sunderland 1993. Crosby had taken Sunderland to the FA Cup final as caretaker manager. That was good enough for the board to give him the permanent job. The following season, Sunderland were due to play Tranmere Rovers. The match was called off. Waterlogged pitch. The football pools panel A group that used to sit and decide what the result would have been for betting purposes ruled that Tranmere would have won. Crosby was sacked because of a game that didn't happen, based on a decision made by a panel about a hypothetical result. He was fired for a loss that never occurred. Vicente del Bosque, Real Madrid. Del Bosque was the quietest, most unfussy, most professional manager you could imagine. No ego, no drama, just trophies. In 4 years at Real Madrid, he won 2 Champions Leagues, 2 La Liga titles, and several other trophies. June 24th, 2003. One day after Real Madrid won La Liga, Del Bosque found out his contract was not being renewed, and the timing gets worse. A week earlier, the club had announced the signing of David Beckham, the most famous footballer on the planet, brought in to make the Galacticos project even more star-studded. They replaced the man who had actually made the Galacticos work and replaced him with flash over substance. They threw him away the morning after a title win. Roberto Di Matteo, Chelsea. Chelsea won the Champions League under Di Matteo, their first ever. The night in Munich, Drogba's header, the penalties, the chaos, the glory. 6 months later, Di Matteo was sacked. Chelsea were losing in the Champions League group stage the following season. Abramovich didn't like what he was seeing. One moment, you are literally the Champions League winning manager. 6 months later, you're out the door. Di Matteo later said in interviews that he never felt properly secure even after winning it. He was right not to. Nigel Pearson, Watford. 2 games remaining. 3 points above the relegation zone. Watford sacked Nigel Pearson. This man had walked into a club at the bottom of the table 9 months earlier. He beat Liverpool 3-0. Liverpool, who hadn't lost in 44 Premier League games. He dragged them off the floor. 2 games left. Still alive. Sacked. Owner Gino Pozzo apparently wasn't happy with first-half performances since the restart. First-half performances. Watford lost their final 2 games, were relegated, and Pearson was gone. Football. I bet you're already seeing some of it by now. That's not the biggest one. Let's get right back to it. Nuno Espírito Santos, Nottingham Forest. Nuno took Nottingham Forest into European competition for the first time since 1995. He was sacked at the start of the following season for publicly criticizing the club's owner. His replacement, Ange Postecoglou, lasted 39 days, the shortest permanent managerial reign in Premier League history. His replacement, Sean Dyche, lasted 114 days, 3 managers in 1 season, at a club that had just returned to Europe. Brian Clough, Derby County, 3rd in the 1st Division. European football on the horizon. Brian Clough, possibly the greatest manager England ever produced, was forced out of Derby County. Not because of results, because the chairman, Sam Longson, got tired of seeing his face on the television too often. Clough wrote newspaper columns, appeared on TV, said things, had opinions, was brilliant and magnetic and impossible to control. Longson wanted him tamed. Clough refused to be tamed. The fans marched, protests in the streets. MPs got involved. Longson didn't budge. Clough left for Nottingham Forest. Won back-to-back European Cups. Derby County have never come close to those heights again. Fabio Capello, Real Madrid. Capello won La Liga in his first season. 5 wins from his first 6 games. Dominant. Clinical. Exactly what the club wanted. The football wasn't attractive enough. Sacked. Replaced by Arsenio Iglesias, who lasted 1 season without winning anything. Capello came back 2 years later, won another La Liga title. They sacked him again. Real Madrid sacked Fabio Capello twice. For winning. Kevin Cullis, Swansea City. Cullis lasted 7 days. 2 matches. The second match was a 4-0 defeat to Blackpool. At halftime, Cullis went into the dressing room for his team talk. The players ignored him. Not subtly. Visibly. Some of them stood up and gave the team talk themselves while Cullis was still in the room. He was sacked shortly after. To be absolutely certain nobody had gone mad, this genuinely happened. A manager in a dressing room, while the players conducted the halftime team talk without him. Barry Fry, Birmingham City. Barry Fry was sacked by Birmingham City chairman David Sullivan so many times by some accounts, over 30 times across various incidents, that he essentially stopped counting. Sullivan would lose his temper after a bad result, sack Fry, and then rehire him the next morning. Fry described one exchange where Sullivan called him, sacked him over the phone, and then called back 20 minutes later to say he'd been drinking and hadn't meant it. This happened multiple times. Fry later described his relationship with Sullivan as complicated. That may be the understatement of footballing history. This is so shocking and funny if you made it this far. Let's dig in more. Paul Sturrock, Plymouth. Sturrock was appointed Plymouth manager. 3 months later, he was offered a far more prestigious job, Southampton. Plymouth released him to go. Southampton appointed him. 13 days later, Southampton sacked him, citing his health and the performances in preseason. 13 days. He left a League One club for a Premier League club and lasted 13 days. Plymouth had let him go. Southampton had got rid of him. Sturrock was suddenly manager of nobody. Xabi Alonso, Real Madrid. This one is brand new. Xabi Alonso, one of the most beloved figures in Real Madrid history as a player, brought in to manage the club. The announcement was celebrated as a homecoming. Sacked in January 2026 after losing the Spanish Super Cup final to Barcelona. Reports of months of dressing room tension, particularly with Vinicius Jr., preceded the decision. So strange and disappointing. Paulo Di Canio, Sunderland. Di Canio arrived at Sunderland and immediately overhauled everything. Diet, training intensity, discipline, the full reset. He also banned ketchup in the canteen. And mayonnaise. Gone. Not allowed. Players were reportedly furious. Not about the tactics, about the condiments. Combined with a bad start to the season, the dressing room collectively wrote a letter of complaints to the board. 6 months in, Di Canio was sacked. He banned ketchup, lost his job. Football, Jose Mourinho, Tottenham. 6 days before a Carabao Cup final. Tottenham's first chance at a trophy since 2008. Mourinho gone. The reason? Poor Premier League form. 7th place. 1 win in 5. But the timing. 6 days before Wembley. The caretaker Ryan Mason went instead. Spurs lost 1-0 to Manchester City. Mourinho later called it the most ridiculous decision of his career. His words, "A club that has an empty trophy room sacks me 2 days before a final." He had a point. Enzo Moresco, Chelsea. Chelsea's 6th permanent manager since 2022. Won the Conference League. Won the Club World Cup. By any standard, doing the job. But while still employed as Chelsea's manager, he held talks with Manchester City about potentially replacing Pep Guardiola. Twice. October, then December. After a 2-2 draw with Bournemouth, he said he'd endured the worst 48 hours since joining the club. After a draw, not a defeat. Then skipped the post-match press conference, claiming illness. The relationship collapsed publicly. He was gone on New Year's Day. Conference League winner. Club World Cup winner. Sacked on January 1st. Chelsea's 5th manager in 3 years. The carousel never stops at Stamford Bridge. Hugo Bruce, Cameroon. Bruce won the Africa Cup of Nations with Cameroon in 2017. The whole tournament. Beat Egypt in the final. The federation celebrated. Then restructured. Then delayed his contract payments. Then delayed them again. Eventually, Bruce walked. Unpaid, unappreciated, AFCON winner's medal in his pocket. He later said he was owed months of salary that never arrived. You can win the entire Continental Championship and still not get paid. Football has a way of humiliating even the best outcomes. Hank Tenkate, UAE. Tenkate had worked at Barcelona, at Chelsea, at Ajax. Serious pedigree. He was appointed UAE national team manager. Then gave an interview in which he said his own players weren't technically good enough to compete at the highest level. He was talking about the squad he had been given to manage. He was being honest. The UAE Federation sacked him immediately for the comments. The UAE then failed to qualify for the Asian Cup anyway. Fired for telling the truth. The results proved he was right.